Safety and love. The needle was still in her hand when the door flew open. Nneka did not scream. She had grown up in Lagos, where noise was a language and chaos was a dialect. She had learned early that panic was a luxury for people with fewer problems. So when the man stumbled into exam room 3 of the Hongdae Community Clinic at 11:30 on a Thursday night, bleeding from a wound that had no business existing on a law-abiding citizen, she simply set the suture needle down on the tray and looked at him with the steady, assessing gaze of someone who had seen suffering in too many forms to be undone by it. "Sit," she said. He sat. His name was Park Hyunwoo, and she would not know that for another 6 minutes. Not until he had stopped bleeding enough to speak. Not until the color had crept back into his brown face and his breathing had slowed from the ragged gasps of a man running from something into the measured rhythm of a man trying to decide whether he was safe. He had dark circles under his eyes that were not from tonight's blood loss. Those circles were older. They had been there a long time. "How did this happen?" Nneka asked, her gloved hands moving with the precision of someone who had stitched together worse in worse places. He looked at the ceiling. "I fell." "You fell onto something sharp enough to puncture 4 centimeters into your lateral abdomen." It was a very bad fall. She looked up at him then, directly, the way she had learned to look at patients who were lying. Not accusingly, not with judgment, but with the particular patience of a woman who had all night and who understood that lies always cost the person telling them more than the person hearing them. "You don't have to tell me," she said, "but I'll need to know if there are other injuries I'm not seeing. That's not me being curious. That's me keeping you alive." Something shifted in his face. Not an opening exactly, more like the recognition that she was not playing a game he knew the rules to. "Just the one wound," he said. "I promise." She believed him. She did not know why, but she did. He came back 3 days later for the follow-up she had not actually scheduled, and he brought her a container of Namdaemun market tteokbokki, because, he said, he had heard Nigerian people liked spicy food, and he was trying to be polite. She stared at the container for a moment, then at him, then at the container again. "That is a significant assumption about an entire nation of people," she said. "Is it wrong?" She opened the container, ate a piece, and pointed at the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Mr. Park." He sat. That was how it began, not with thunder or lightning or the dramatic collision of 2 people who knew immediately that their lives were about to change, but with tteokbokki and a man who had learned to be careful about everything, except, apparently, showing up in places he had no reason to be. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He always arrived near the end of her shift, when the clinic had quieted and the other nurses had gone home, and the overhead fluorescents cast the waiting room in that specific shade of tired yellow that made everything feel a little more honest. He would sit across from her in the office that was barely big enough for 2 people, and he would drink the coffee she stopped pretending not to make for him, and they would talk, really talk, the way that people rarely do, with the kind of attention that costs something. She told him about Enugu, where she had grown up, the way the harmattan came in December and covered everything in red dust, and her mother would hang the laundry anyway, because there was no sense fighting the season. She told him about medical school, how she had been the only woman in her cohort who had wanted to specialize in emergency medicine, and how the men around her had cycled through condescension and respect and back again, depending on how threatened they felt that week. She told him about the job offer in Seoul, how she had taken it partly for the adventure and partly because she had understood, at 28, that staying in one place too long was its own kind of slow disappearance. He listened to all of it the way people listen when they are genuinely hungry for something and do not know how to say so. He told her less, but what he told her plainly. "I have people who depend on me," he said one evening, when she had asked carefully about family. "Parents? And others." She let the silence sit between them like something alive. She was good at silence. Most doctors weren't. They were trained to fill it, to mistake quiet for emptiness. But Nneka had learned years ago that silence was where the real information lived. "Others?" she repeated softly. "It's complicated." Most true things are. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully name, something between gratitude and grief, which she was beginning to understand were not as far apart as people like to pretend. "I joined something," he said finally, "when I was 22, Because my father owed a debt he couldn't pay, and I was the oldest son, and there was no other door that was open. I told myself it was temporary. He paused. I've been telling myself that for 9 years. She did not gasp. She did not recoil. She held his gaze and let him finish. What do you do? She asked. In this thing you joined. I manage problems, he said. I keep things from escalating when they don't need to. I'm not. He stopped, began again. I have never hurt anyone who wasn't trying to hurt someone else first. That's the line you've drawn? It's the only one I've managed to hold. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded on the desk the way she folded them when she was thinking seriously about something, not rushing to the answer, not performing consideration, but actually sitting inside the complexity of it. I believe you, she said, and I also want you to hear me say this clearly. Believing you doesn't mean I think it's okay. It means I think you're a person who made a choice in an impossible situation and has been paying for it ever since, and that's different from thinking the situation itself is acceptable. He stared at her. Most people either excuse it entirely or condemn it entirely. Most people are uncomfortable with the middle, she said. The middle is where real things live. He fell in love with her somewhere in that sentence, though he would not use that word for several more weeks. Not even inside his own head, because he had spent 9 years disciplining himself against attachment, and the habit was deeply worn. She fell in love with him more slowly, or perhaps more honestly, which is to say she noticed it, named it to herself, examined it from multiple angles the way she examined a patient before making a diagnosis, and then made a deliberate decision to let it happen. Because Nneka had always believed that love was not something that happened to you. Love was something you walked toward with your eyes open, knowing the cost, choosing it anyway. The cost here was considerable. She understood this when she saw the car outside the clinic for the second time in 1 week. Dark, unmarked, idling with the particular patience of people who are paid to wait. She understood it when one of her regulars, an older man who came in monthly for blood pressure checks, looked at her one afternoon with something careful in his face and said, Seon Sengnim, be careful of the company you keep. She understood it when Hyunwoo arrived one night, with bruised knuckles that he did not explain, and tension in his jaw that he could not entirely hide, and she stitched the cuts on his hands in silence, and felt, for the first time, the real shape of what his life looked like from the inside. Hyunwoo, she said, when she had finished. What happened tonight? A misunderstanding. Between you and someone's face? He almost smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something like that. She set down the gauze, looked at him directly. I need to say something to you, and I need you to actually hear it, not just nod. He went still in the way he always went still when she used that tone, not defensive, but present. Bracing himself, but not closing off. That had always been one of the things she loved most about him, the capacity to be reached. I love you, she said. I want that to be clear before I say the next part, because I don't want you to hear the next part as rejection. Are you hearing me? I'm hearing you. I won't be the reason you stay in something that is killing you, she said. I won't be the woman you come home to in order to make yourself feel like a good man while you're still doing things that compromise who you actually are. And I won't be the thing you hide behind, the proof you show yourself that you're still human while you're still in that world. She paused. Her voice was steady but not cold. It was the steadiness of someone who had thought very hard about every word before speaking it. If you're going to be in my life, really in it, not just visiting, it has to be because you have chosen to get out of that world. Not for me, for yourself. Because you have decided that you deserve a life that doesn't cost you this much. The room was so quiet, she could hear the hum of the refrigeration unit in the supply closet next door. Hyunwoo looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. This was the thing that undid him, had always undone him, the way she refused to soften the hard things, but refused equally to make them cruel. She held the truth up, the way you hold a light in a dark room, not to expose but to illuminate. To say, I see you, and I see this, and I think you can do better, and I think you know it too. You're not asking me to choose between you and them, he said slowly. No, she said. I'm asking you to choose between who you are now and who you could be. I'm not even in that equation." "You're in everything," he said. It came out quieter than he intended. She reached across the desk and took his hands, the bandaged ones, carefully, and held them in both of hers. "Then let me be in something you're proud of." He did not leave the organization that night. It was not that kind of story. The kind where one conversation dissolves 9 years of loyalty and debt and fear and complicated love for the people he had built a life around inside that world. The real world did not work that way, and Nneka knew it, which was why she had not asked for that. She had asked for something harder and more important than a single dramatic gesture. She had asked for a decision, a direction, a turning of the compass, even if the walking would take time. He came back to her 2 weeks later. He sat down across from her and he said, "I told them I'm stepping back. They didn't like it. It's not going to be clean or easy." "I know," she said. "There's a man above me who doesn't like loose ends." "I know that too. I might need you to not ask me what I'm doing for the next few months while I figure out how to do this without getting myself or anyone else killed." She looked at him steadily. "What I need from you," she said, "is the truth about whether you are actually moving toward the door or whether you're telling me a story to keep me close." He met her eyes. "I am moving toward the door. I swear it." "Then go," she said, "and come back when you're through it." He did both. It took 4 months, and she would not learn the details until much later, in pieces, over the kind of long evenings that accumulate into years. What she knew in those 4 months was the shape of absence, the silence on his end of the phone that told her he was in something difficult, and the brief messages that told her he was still alive, and the discipline it required to not call, to not chase, to not make herself into a rope he could hold when things got bad inside that world and needed an anchor. She had promised herself she would not be that. So she worked her shifts and she called her mother on Sundays, and she went running along the Han River in the early mornings when the city was still waking up. And she let herself miss him fully, without letting that missing become a reason to reduce what she had asked of him. Because she understood something about love that a lot of people in her life had not. Loving someone did not mean absorbing their journey. It did not mean making their hard things easier by removing the consequences that might be the very thing forcing growth. It meant holding the space for who they could become without dragging them there. When he knocked on her door on a Tuesday in November, she opened it and looked at him for a long moment before she said anything. He looked exhausted. He looked older in a way that was not about years. He looked like a man who had done something very difficult and had not come out of it clean exactly, but had come out of it, which was the part that mattered. "Are you through it?" she asked. "I'm through it," he said. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Then come inside," she said. "I'll make tea." He stood in her small kitchen while she moved around it with the ease of someone comfortable in her own space, and he watched her with the particular attention of a man who has spent a long time looking at things he wanted to protect and has finally found something he intends to build instead. The city was loud outside the window, Seoul doing what Seoul always did, pressing forward, stacking sound on sound, refusing stillness. And inside the kitchen it was warm and smelled like the ginger tea she was already boiling, and the complicated relief of 2 people finding each other on the other side of something difficult. "I didn't do it for you," he said. She turned and smiled at him, and it was the best smile he had ever seen on a human face. "I know," she said. "That's why it worked." She handed him his cup. He took it. Their fingers brushed in the way that they had been brushing for months in small offices and quiet rooms. But this time, there was nothing between them that needed to be resolved. No unasked questions, no held-back truths. Just the weight of a choice made clearly, and the warmth of someone who had believed from the very beginning that he was capable of making it. Outside, Seoul moved through its 1,000 lights. Inside the kitchen, Nneka and Park Hyunwoo drank their tea and talked and started, without ceremony, without fanfare, the ordinary, extraordinary work of building something real. Love without accountability is just attachment. Real love asks more of you, and the asking, if it comes from someone who sees you clearly and believes in you anyway, is the greatest gift one person can give another. Not rescue, not tolerance, just the clean, demanding mirror of someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth and brave enough to wait and see what you do with